So, I'm going to be doing something fun, specifically for you. So I've built a couple of decks. I've play tested them once to make sure that they do the things that they're supposed to do, and I'm going to be doing a pseudo archetype archive-esque thing for each of these decks, kind of. If you don't know what Archetype Archive is, if you remember correctly, not the last time that you were over here, but a previous time that you were over here, I had you watch a portion of the Alien video, if you remember correctly. We can get through all of it, but that video and other videos like it are by a specific guy on YouTube named Rada, Rank 10 Yu-Gi-Oh! Which Yu-Gi-Oh! Is Y-G-O. Anyways, doesn't matter. So I'm going to be doing an Archetype Archive-esque thing for the decks that I've made for you. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the one that I feel like I can explain possibly the best as the first take. So, your guess. So, let's start. Almost dropped the phone. Let's start actually, instead of going in a descending order from right up here where my mouse is, let's start with this one. Now, this entire deck, as you can see up there, as you can see right here, is called Infernoids. So this archetype is, again, called Infernoids, and we have their first monster right here. Infernoid, Permai, whatever. All of them are fiend, fire monsters, fire fiends, whatever. In mostly ascending levels from 1 to 10, there is a singular exception, and this is specifically for the main deck. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this card. Cannot be normal summoned or set. Must be special summoned from your hand by banishing one Infernoid monster from your hand or graveyard, while the total levels and ranks of all effect monsters you control are 8 or lower, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. Once per turn, you can target one set card on the field, shuffle it into the deck. That card cannot be activated in response to this effect's activation. Once per turn, during your opponent's turn, you can tribute one monster, then target one card in your opponent's graveyard, banish it. This is a quick effect. So, Permise sets up a fair bit of a style for the entire deck, where most of them cannot be normal summoned or set, meaning that you don't have entirely easy access to really any of the monsters unless you send some monsters in Archetype to the graveyard. So that's the first thing about this deck that's super unique. The second thing is the fact that you need to banish these monsters from your graveyard or hand. So what this would mean is, there are plenty of Infernoid monsters, but you could theoretically activate Pirmais, banish another copy of Pirmais, and be fine. And the third thing, which there's actually more, I don't know why I said and, but the third thing is the fact that you need to keep the levels and ranks of all effect monsters you control under 8. At 8 or below 8. And that is the only way that they can be special summoned. So, ranks don't matter in this deck. Ranks don't matter at all. Levels are simply the stars that they have. So you can kind of see, it's basically impossible for me to get out of the deck without me actually being able to show it. So, okay, better yet. See this? This is a level rating. This is a 1 star. You can also see it right up here. However many stars there are right here, that's the level of the monster. Fairly simple stuff. Now, the fourth thing is the fact that all of them, not all of them, but the 1 through 8, the levels 1 through 8 monsters all have this last effect text down here, being the quick effect, meaning during either player's turn. Tribute a monster, banish an opponent's graveyard card. So, banishing is simply, quite literally, removing it from play. It is almost impossible to get these cards back unless your deck focuses on getting them back. Most decks don't. Now, Peter Meiss's own effect being the spinning a set card back into the deck, and then that card not being able to be activated, is okay. It definitely isn't the best effect, and by spinning I mean shuffle it into the deck. That's kind of like a buzzword for Yu-Gi-Oh! Spinning is sending back to deck, bouncing is back to hand. You'll see bouncing in a second here. But from this point forward, I will not be mentioning the banishing effect, and I will not be mentioning the final effect on the rest of the monsters unless that final effect changes. I will also not be as I said before, I won't be mentioning the banishing thing unless the amount of monsters needing to be banished changes. So then we come to Infernoid Decatron. Now, Decatron is also a level 1 monster. This is the one exception. I don't know why they decided to do this, but Decatron is also the only monster that can be normal summoned or set. 500 attack, 200 defense, Fiend Fire, like the rest of them. Same stuff, different day. Different monster, more like it. And this one, like I said, is able to be normal summoned or set. So if it's normal or special summoned, you can send one Infernoid monster from your deck to the graveyard, except Decatron, and if you do, increase this card's level by the level of the sent monster, and if you do that, this card's name becomes that monster's original name, and replaces this effect with that monster's original effects. So this is an interesting card that you kind of run at 1, or 3, or 2, because you can only run up to 3 of a same card. So you can only run 3 Decatron. You can't run 4, don't try it. So Decatron is extremely important if you want to bring out the first boss monster of this archetype. It's extremely important, as that boss monster requires 2 very specific monsters of this archetype that are fairly difficult to get out. Because you need to have one in hand and the other on the field, or both in hand. And it's impossible to have both on the field. So Decatron, pretty good card. Being the only one that can be normal or special summoned, it makes it pretty freaking good. Now we move on to the rest of the archetype, all of these having the same effect as Pure Mice. We won't be seeing another Decatron. So Antra, again, banish 1, opponent's turn, tribute a monster, banish an opponent's graveyard card, etc., etc., etc. And once per turn, you can target one face-up card your opponent controls, return it to the hand. So, bouncing, as I remember telling you about, bouncing is a pretty good way to deal with problematic monsters, as extra deck monsters get bounced instead of to the hand, as they don't belong there. They get bounced back to the extra deck, where they came from. But for every other type of card, they, again, get bounced back to the hand. Now, bouncing back to the hand can be problematic for certain decks as they like getting bounced back, but this is a very, very unlikely case to have happen. So Entra's fine. Pure Mice I would almost say is better, but the problem is that Pure Mice requires you to target a set card, and this can bring up problems if your opponent just doesn't have a set card. So now we move on to Infernoid Harmadic. Stop laughing. This one's level 3, 1600 0. Not too bad stats. Again, banish 1, again, tribute a monster, and banish an opponent's graveyard card. And then, once returned, you can target one monster on the field, destroy it. Now, targeting destruction has kind of come and gone. It's still useful. It's still okay. It's just that some monsters can't be targeted by card effects or destroyed by card effects that target, which is all extremely specific and extremely mundane words to say, it's a pretty alright card. It's nothing special. It's pretty alright. And here we have Patrulia. 1800 0. Same thing, banish 1, etc., etc. And once returned, you can target one spell or trap card on the field and destroy it. Now, Patrulia has nothing entirely going for it, as Pure Mice does everything that it does better, because Pure Mice allows you to target any set card, and set cards in general can be monsters, spells, or traps. This specifically says spells or traps. Now, is it a bad card? No. Back row destruction is always useful unless the card allows the opponent to plus off of it. But of course, back row destruction is doubly useful if the opponent gets absolutely fucked up by it. And now we move on to higher levels. This is Infernoid Piatti. And Piatti starts the idea of needing two Infernoid monsters to be banished. And again, same exact opponent's graveyard card banish. And when it inflicts battle damage to your opponent by attacking an opponent's monster, you can send one random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. Now, hand ripping, as it's called, as this kind of effect is called, is fairly powerful. Fairly powerful. Hand ripping the opponent is a great way to get rid of problematic cards in their hand that you don't even know they have. The one problem with this is, 1, inflicting battle damage, and 2, by attacking an opponent's monster. Now, the main problem with these is you can only really have this happen during the battle phase. So this therefore means that this therefore means that if the opponent doesn't have a monster on the board, you can't really hand rip. That's the main thing. It doesn't trigger off of any battle damage, so you can't just punch with Piatti and hand rip. No, you need to specifically hope and pray that your opponent has 1, something on the field, and 2, something low enough in attack points or defense points to be destroyed by Piatti. And Piatti's 2200 attack is fine. Again, it's nothing really special. It's okay. So now we move on to Sjet. This is the level 6 one, 2400, and again, banishes 2. And when this card declares an attack, you can banish 1 card from your opponent's extra deck, their choice. Now, interesting wording there, but basically, banishing from the extra deck, interacting with the opponent's extra deck in any way, shape, or form is possibly crippling. But the fact that the opponent gets to choose the card that you banish is interesting. It's not bad, but the opponent then gets to choose the least useful card. And if they have no least useful cards, well, they still get to choose the least useful card because there's always a least useful card. But 2,400 attack points, it's pretty good, and it's much better than Piatti, as Piatti requires you to, again, deal damage. This one just does it upon attack declaration, which is great. Absolutely fantastic. So now we move on to level 7, this one being Scythimus. Scythimus has 2,600 attack, 0 defense. You're going to start seeing a pattern with the 0 defense. Not a lot of them have any defense, really. Again, banishing 2. And if this card attacks an opponent's monster, this effect can be activated at the end of the battle phase. Banish 1 card on the field. So what this means is you won't get this banish immediately after attacking. But at the end of the battle phase, once you're done attacking, once you're done doing everything that you do in the battle phase, you can then banish 1 card on the field. And this can be useful in multiple different scenarios. If your opponent has just too big of a monster, too problematic of a monster. The one problem is that you can't just go into the battle phase and then go to the end of the battle phase and activate Scythimus. No, you specifically do have to attack. So what could possibly happen is you attack with Scythimus, you kill your own Scythimus, and then end the battle phase, and then at the end of the battle phase, you get to still banish a card on the field. Which again is very powerful, as banishing is not something that the opponent can come back from. And here we have a Tondel. This is the level 8, and this marks the end of having this little effect down here. This whole entire once per turn, etc., etc., etc. No more of that. A Tondel, again, you're banishing 2 Infernoid monsters. And when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can activate this effect. This card can make a second attack in a row. So, double attacking on a 2,800 attack point monster is certainly interesting. You can absolutely beat over other monsters. You can certainly beat over a good portion of your opponent's board just with a Tondel. With, again, 2,800 attack points, you're beating over a lot of things, but there are other cards that are simply better at doing this card's job, which is fucking with the opponent. Scythimus, Sajet, even Piatti, all of those are wonderful examples of cards that just do a Tondel's job better than it does. And now we move on to the 2 big ones of the main deck. Infernoid Deviati. Now Deviati is fun. Deviati has 2,900 attack and defense. And you need to banish 3 Infernoid monsters from your hand or graveyard, etc., etc., etc. Now, when this card is special summoned, you can destroy all spells and traps on the field except void cards. Once per turn, when another monster's effect is activated, quick effect, you can tribute 1 monster, negate the activation, and if you do, banish it. Now, Deviati is a fun little card that marks the end of the idea of just, in general, having multiple Infernoid monsters on the field, along with the next card, as Deviati is a level 9, and you need the total levels and ranks of all effect monsters you control to be 8 or lower, so you can only have 1 Deviati on the field at a time. But past this, Deviati is a fantastic card. Great body, great booty, as it's stated in Yu-Gi-Oh! Body talking about attack, booty talking about defense. You get the gist. Not many things are going to be beating over this thing in either way, shape, or form. And it blows up all spells and traps on the field except void cards, which specifically helps you, as the void spell and trap lineup is what makes this deck is what makes up this deck, and one of their cards is specifically just really fucking good. We'll get to that in a second. But the monster effect negation is really good, again. Plus the fact that, I haven't mentioned this, tributing monsters gets monsters into the graveyard so you can then special summon more Infernoid monsters, but again, Devyati and the next monster are not entirely the best examples of this, as they're too high leveled. So all in all, Devyati, good 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 monster. And we have the final main deck monster, Infernoid Onunku. Onunku is a level 10 monster with 3000 attack and defense, also requiring you to banish 3 Infernoid monsters from hand or graveyard, and you can only really have 1 Onunku or Devyati, or in general 1 Onunku or Devyati. You get what I'm saying. You'd only have one of them on the field at one time. Now, when it's special summoned, you can destroy all other monsters on the field. And, once per turn, during either player's turn, when a spell or trap card or effect is activated, you can tribute one monster, negate the activation, and if you do, banish that card. Now, that last effect is what we in the showbiz like to call an Omni-Negate. Your opponent does fucking anything, and so long as you have enough monsters to tribute, you can stop everything that the opponent is trying to do. And the upon special summon pop everything else on the field, pop every other monster on the field, is also wonderful. Fan-fucking-tastic. Great card right here. And this is where I get into a bit of the interesting part with the extra deck. So, like I was saying, Decatron is a wonderful little card that helps you get to your first extra deck boss monster, Infernoid Tierra. Now, Tierra is interesting. Tierra requires Infernoid Onunku, Infernoid Devyati, and 1 or more Infernoid monsters. Now, as I said before, you cannot have both an Onunku and a Devyati on the field at the exact same time. You can't do it. So you need to have one in hand or one on the field. You need to have one in hand and the other on the field. Or you can do a funny thing. If you have the ability to bring out either Devyati or Onunku, and you have Decatron in hand, so let's say you have Decatron and Devyati, or Decatron and Onunku, and you have 3 other monsters in hand. 3 other Infernoid monsters in hand. A good strategy to use in this case would be Decatron, pitch the one that you don't have, then special summon the one that you do have by banishing either Devyati or Onunku in grave, and then 2 other Infernoid monsters in hand, and then fusion summon using the now Decatron, the now Devyati or Onunku Decatron, and the Onunku or Devyati you have on the field with the other monster you have in hand to get out Tierra. Complex? Absolutely. Does it work? Yeah. Have I done it yet? No, Tierra is extremely hard to get out. But the payoff for you getting Tierra out is divine. Let's also look at this. 11 stars, level 11. Fiend, Fire, 3,400 attack, 3,600 defense. Nothing's getting past this unless they are simply stronger. And when it's fusion summoned, you can apply these effects in sequence based on the number of materials with different names used for this card's summon. 3 or more. Each player sends 3 cards from their extra deck to the graveyard. 5 or more. Each player sends the top 3 cards of their deck to the graveyard. 8 or more. Each player returns up to 3 of their banished cards to the graveyard. 10 or more. Each player sends their entire hand to the graveyard. Now, is this easy? No. 3 or more is hard enough. 10 or more is basically impossible without their one main way of getting Tiara out with 10 or more materials. We'll get to that in a second. But Tiara is a fantastic monster if you can bring it out. Sending 3 cards from your extra deck to the graveyard could mean sending 2 more copies of Tiara, which you can then banish to bring out even more Infernoid monsters if this Tiara somehow gets destroyed, because again, all Infernoid monsters have that little clause where the total levels of all monsters on the field need to be 8 or lower. So, if you're able to, great. If you're not able to, which you probably aren't, So, there you go. And then each player sends the top 3 cards of their deck to the graveyard, unless you're playing against a deck that loves having their shit in the graveyard, which is most decks. Then, this is fantastic for you, because you then get to send possibly more Infernoid monsters, to then banish more Infernoid monsters, to then activate more, to then summon more Infernoid monsters. It's great. It's wonderful. 8 or more, you get back some of your stuff. So, for example, you get to return that Daviadi or Anunku and the other 2 cards that you banished in order to summon out Daviadi or Anunku in order to bring this out. You can return those back to the graveyard. And then 10 or more, sending your entire hand to the graveyard sounds bad, but this deck bases itself on the fact that you are likely to be handless or very close to it, and sending your opponent's hand to the graveyard stops them from making basically any plays. They have to top deck, meaning, draw the top card of their deck and get a really good way to get out of that situation, called drawing the out. They need to top deck an out so powerful that they can come back from having their entire hand sent to the graveyard, possibly on the first turn, if you are lucky enough. And therein lies the problem. You have to be lucky enough. If you aren't, well, you're kind of screwed. High risk, high reward. Don't do it unless you know that you can capitalize on it. And even then, be paranoid. Now, Evil is a new card to the deck. It actually hasn't been released here in the States yet. But Evil is a level 1 Fiend Fire monster with 1100 attack and defense, requiring just 2 Infernoid monsters. And if it's fusion summoned, you can banish 1 Infernoid monster from your graveyard, send Infernoid monsters with different names from each other from your deck to the graveyard equal to the banished monster's level. If this card is sent to the graveyard or banished, you can add 1 Void Spell or Trap from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effective Infernoid Evil once per turn. So Evil is, once again, a fantastic card. Evil allows you to send... you get to banish any Infernoid monster from grave. So let's say that you somehow get an Anunku into grave. Let's say that you use Anunku and literally any of these other ones. You get out Evil. You banish Anunku. You banish 10... You send to the graveyard 10 different Infernoid monsters with different names from each other. Meaning 1 Devyati, 1 Atandal, 1 Saitsamus, 1 Sajet, 1 Piadi, 1 Patrulia, 1 Harmadek, 1 Antra, 1 Decatron, 1 Pure Mice. And this then allows you to generate stupid amounts of advantage, as Evil is a level 1 monster. So you get to simply allow yourself to bring out even more monsters. You would think that this would be like a level 4 or level 8 or something. No, this is a level 1. You get to go max advantage if you're able to. Which is wonderful. So, great card. Great card. And if it's sent to the graveyard or banished, you can just add a Void Spell or Trap from deck to hand. Which, again, we'll get to the Void back row lineup. But it's pretty good. One of their cards is really fucking good for this deck. Beyond good. Beyond good. Then we have Flood, which Flood is a Link 4 monster pointing up, bottom right, down, and bottom left. Now, Link monsters are interesting, and you can see that specifically with the requirements. 2 or more monsters, including an Infernoid monster. Now, I feel like I should mention this. This deck is as pure as I could make it, meaning there is no other way to really link climb into the sky. Link climbing meaning like you have a Link 2 monster where you would have to send 2 monsters to the graveyard in order to bring it out. And then that way you can use just 3 monsters in order to bring this out. I could better explain Flood in a less time-constrained environment, but this is a time-constrained environment. But Flood has 3,000 attack, and when your opponent would special summon a monster or monsters, quick effect, you contribute 1 monster, negate the summon, and if you do, banish that monster or monsters. If a card or cards is banished from your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can banish 1 card on the field. If this link summon card is in its opponent... Oh my god, I'm messing up. If this link summon card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can special summon 1 Infernoid monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions, and you can only use each effective Flood once per turn. So Flood is a wonderful enabler for the deck. First off, if an opponent's monster is summoned, you can just tribute a monster and just negate and banish it, which then doesn't actually trigger the second effect, but you're going to be triggering that second effect often as you're attempting to summon out more and more cards, which allows you to banish more and more cards the opponent controls, leaving them with less and less options to counteract you. And then if this thing ever just leaves the field, you get to bring out, oh, I don't know, a funny little Anunku. And then since it's special summon, you get to blow up every other monster on the field. Wow. Fun. So, now we get to the one card in this deck that makes it even function. Void Imagination. Void Imagination is a continuous spell. Reading. Infernoid monsters you control whose original levels are 2 or higher become level 1 and all battle damage they inflict to your opponent is halved. You can send this card to the graveyard. Fusion summon 1 Infernoid fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or your side of the field as fusion materials. If your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, and you do not, you can also use up to 6 monsters in your deck as fusion materials. So, right off the bat, the first effect enables this deck to Helen back. Remember what I said about how Anunku and Devyadi just kind of fuck with your plays as you can't bring out any more? No longer. Everything except for Degatron and Pure Mice become level 1, and they're already level 1, so it doesn't really matter. This allows you to have an entire field of these bastards, with the only caveat being that all battle damage they inflict is halved, which I would say isn't really that bad of a problem to have. Having the damage that you deal is nothing compared to not being able to make any plays. Does it make the opponent harder to kill? Does it make it harder for you to kill the opponent, in other words? Yeah. But really, you can just send this card to the graveyard whenever it isn't that useful anymore. Or if you have a second one and you know that you can just send this to the graveyard and then activate another one and still reap the benefits in the negativities, then go ahead. And that little clause at the very end, if your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, that's happening. That's happening whether you like it or not. And in this case, you like it. You like it a lot. Because what you're able to do in this case, and it doesn't happen often, but if you're really lucky, if your hand consists of 4 Infernoid monsters, and any 4 Infernoid monsters, hopefully of different names, and you activate this and send it to the graveyard, you can get out a 10 material Tiara and activate every single effect. That's the other thing. That's another thing that I forgot to mention. These effects activate in succession. So you send 3 from your extra deck to the graveyard. You send the top 3 cards. Each player sends 3 cards from their extra deck to the graveyard. Then the top 3 cards of their deck to the graveyard. Then returns up to 3 of their banished cards to the graveyard, and then sends their entire hand to the graveyard. I forgot to mention that, but now I have. This card makes the deck run, and if you don't have this on the field, the entire deck, your strategy is going to die fast. Best card in the deck, you run 3 of this card at all times. It's just fantastic. It's wonderful. Now, getting back on track to go in semi-chronological order, we actually move up to another one of their newest cards, Void Blaze Up. Reveal 1 Infernoid monster or 1 Void spell or trap in your hand, discard your entire hand, then draw the same number of cards you discarded. If you control no monsters or only fiend monsters, except this turn was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target up to 11 of your banished Infernoid monsters with different names, return them to the graveyard. You can only use this effect of Void Blaze Up once per duel. Once per duel is a funny little effect that basically just means you activate this effect and you can no longer anymore. Nuh-uh. But that first effect is wonderful, because you just reveal 1, and then you discard your entire hand, and you draw an entirely new hand, which refreshes a possible dead hand, and then allows you to do extra plays. For example, if you have Anunku and Devyadi in hand, but you don't have 3 other Infernoid monsters to banish, you can activate this, send 4 or 5 cards, or just in general your entire hand, including those 2, to the graveyard. Draw a new hand, possibly it's Imagination, you activate Imagination, then you banish possibly Devyadi and 2 other Infernoid monsters that you have in your hand now. You banish those 3 to go into Anunku. Anunku goes into a level 1 because of imagination, and then you just blow up everything the opponent has. It's pretty good. Cherry-picked example? Possibly, but it's still funny. So now, we move on to Void Seer, or Void Seer. Sounds exactly the same. Whatever. Target one Infernoid monster you control. That target is unaffected by the opponent's card effects this turn. If an Infernoid monster or monsters you control would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead of destroying one of those monsters. So, in all actuality, Tierra is a debatable boss monster, as it simply doesn't have this kind of stuff. It isn't unaffected by the opponent's card effects. It can be removed immediately. But with Seer, you can make any of your monsters unaffected. If you have a specific playmaker, hint, hint, that you just don't want to have blown up or negated, then you can activate Seer, and bada bing, bada boom. You then get to make plays from there and have fun. The banish instead of destroying that monster is also extremely helpful if that ever comes up. So, good card, good card. Void Apocalypse. You can discard one card, send one Fiend monster from your deck to the graveyard. You can send this face-up card from your spell and trap zone to the graveyard. Send Infernoid monsters with different names from your hand and or deck to the graveyard, up to the number of monsters your opponent controls that are special summoned from the extra deck. You can only use one Void Apocalypse effect per turn, and only once that turn. So, Apocalypse seems extremely bare bones, maybe, at first, but that first effect is really good. You discard one and then send another from deck. That allows you to, I don't know, banish both for a Sightsimus, banish both for, I don't know, a Sajet, banish one for Harmodek and one for Antra, etc., etc. Great card. And the added sending of this card to the graveyard and then sending even more Infernoid monsters from hand or deck to grave up to the number of monsters the opponent controls from the extra deck is also going to happen most of the time. It's something that you just can't not have happen. It's going to happen, whether you like it or not. And again, you're going to like it. Now we move on to Void Vanishment. You can discard one card, add one Void Spell or Trap card from your deck to your hand, except Void Vanishment or Null and Void. Also, you cannot normal or special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except Infernoid monsters. You can only use this effect of Void Vanishment once per turn. If an Infernoid monster you control battles an opponent's monster after damage calculation, you can send this card to the graveyard, banish those monsters. Now, Vanishment only really works with one monster, that being a Tondel, as a Tondel allows you to attack twice. So that last effect is only really useful with a Tondel. But the other effect, discarding an Infernoid monster possibly to grab the best card in the entire deck, this is not up for debate. And then activating Imagination, it's pretty good. Pretty decent effect. And now we move on to the fourth and final card that isn't entirely in the TCG here in the States yet, Void Barrier. Infernoid monsters you control gain 100 attack for each of your banished Infernoid monsters. If you control no monsters, or only Fiend monsters, you can activate one of these effects. Add one of your banished Infernoid monsters to your hand, or special summon one Infernoid monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions. You can only use this effect of Void Barrier once per turn. So, first off, right off the bat, you're going to be having, the longer the duel progresses, the bigger the stats of your cards are going to get. That 100 attack for each banished Infernoid monster stacks quickly, and it doesn't go away unless you want it to go away because you need to start actually making plays again. The second and third effects are also very good, allowing you to, again, do some more plays if you just don't have them anymore. If you banish Decatron and you activate the second effect, adding it back to hand, and then summon Decatron in order to send Devyati or Anunku, or literally any of the other ones, because this isn't just... Decatron isn't only useful for Devyati and Anunku, but it's the most useful for those two. But doing that allows you to make even more plays from there. And then, of course, special summoning an Infernoid monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions, specifically works well with the fact that you won't always have Imagination on the field, and you might have Devyati or Anunku on the field, or even Atandal on the field as well, when that happens. This then allows you to just bring out another one, ignoring its summoning conditions, meaning that you don't have to... You can have as many levels as you want. You can have the total levels be as high as you want, so long as you use that second effect. Pretty good card. Now we move on to the field spell, and actually the last spell of the Void lineup. Void Expansion. During your standby phase, you can special summon one Infernoid token, which is a Fiend-type Fire level 1 monster with attack 0 and defense 0. And then, to special summon an Infernoid monster, using its own procedure, you can banish Infernoid monsters you control instead of those in the graveyard, or any combination of both. Your opponent cannot target Infernoid monsters you control for attacks or with card effects except the Infernoid monster you control with the highest level, either if tied. So right off the bat, this just allows you to do a lot of different things, really. This allows you to, for example, special summon that Infernoid token, and then banish that token in order to bring out Pure Mice, Antra, Harmodic, Patrulia, or if you have another one on the field, you can also use that token and that Infernoid monster to go into Piatis, Jet, Saitsumas, Atandal, and if you have two or more monsters other than that token on the field, you can also bring out Devyati and Anunku. So that also helps with filling in a singular hole with the archetype, being that you don't always have the stuff that you need in the graveyard. You don't always have all the monsters that you need. Sometimes you have them on the field, so you have to run them into the opponent's stuff to then make plays in main phase 2, where you can actually capitalize on the plays that you make. Having expansion on the field allows you to simply do more things. And of course, the last effect protects your lower leveled Infernoid monsters from just being destroyed, making them target... I keep on going back to them, but they're the best cards in the deck, best monsters in the main deck, Anunku and Devyati. Having Anunku and Devyati being as big as they are in both attack and defense makes them great walls for the opponent. And now, we move on to the spell and trap. We move on to the trap lineup. The first card being Void Feast. Send one Void spell or trap from your hand or face-up field to the graveyard. Special summon up to 3 Infernoid monsters from your deck whose total levels exactly equal 8, ignoring their summoning conditions. So this is fantastic. absolutely fantastic. If you already have, for example, I keep on going back to them, if you already have Devyadi or Anunku on field, you can activate this, sending... If you don't really need... for example, let's just say that you send Apocalypse. You activate Feast, you send Apocalypse. This then allows you to bring out, I don't know, Antra and 2 Harmodek, a Harmodek, a Patrulia, and a Decatron, etc., etc., etc. It's up to 3. It isn't specifically 3. So if you specifically need, like, Saitsumas and Decatron, you can do that, because those equal exactly 8. And again, ignoring their summoning conditions. Eye of the Void. Eye of the Void. Special summon 1 Infernoid monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions, but its effects are negated until the end of this turn. Thankfully, this effect negation doesn't actually go for the entirety of the time that's on the field. That would actually make this card suck. No, it's pretty good, pretty decent in that venture. As, again, I keep on going back to them. If you have Anunku and or Devyadi in hand, you can just activate this, bring them out, and then you... Sure, you don't actually get their Omni negates, or in general negates, or upon being special summoned blow up a portion of the field. You don't get those effects immediately, but instead you get a wall, which allows you to possibly survive longer. Next up is Void Purification. If you control a monster that is not an Infernoid monster, send this card to the graveyard. You can only use each of these effects of Void Purification once per turn. During each of your opponent's standby phases, you can target 1 Infernoid monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. During each of your standby phases, you can target one of your banished Infernoid monsters, return it to the graveyard. So, Purification is also pretty good for this deck. You get to add back playmakers, and you get to return cards to the graveyard to then make more plays. To be honest, really good card. Really good card. Extends your already explosive plays. And finally, we have Void Launch. During each of your standby phases, you can send up to 2 Infernoid monsters from your deck to the graveyard. Oh, sorry. I thought there was more. This is my first time doing one of these. Have some patience. So, during each of your standby phases, you can send up to 2 Infernoid monsters from your deck to the graveyard. If you control a monster that is not an Infernoid monster, send this card to the graveyard. So, Launch is kind of like Feast and Purification. They help you extend your plays. They help you get more stuff out onto the field faster. All in all, this is getting to the end of it. All in all, this deck is very discard focused, as you can probably tell. You want more and more cards in your graveyard. More and more. So you can then banish them, get out better things, all that stuff. Shout out to these 2 cards right here, Monster Gate and Reasoning. Reasoning allows the opponent to declare a monster level from 1 to 12, and then you activate cards from the top of your deck until you activate a monster that can be normal or special summoned. Then, if that monster is the same level as the one declared by your opponent, send all activated cards to the graveyard, and if not, special summon the activated monster. Also, send the remaining cards to the graveyard. So, really, what this does is it specifically requires you to have Decatron. Decatron is why you run these 2 cards, because Monster Gate is kind of the same. You tribute a monster and activate cards from the top of your deck until you excavate a monster that can be normal or special summoned, and special summon it, also send the other cards to the graveyard. It allows you to dig through your deck for your Decatrons if you don't have them. Now, the one that you can see right here basically means that they're limited. You can only have one of each in the deck, so you can only have one Reasoning, and you can only have one Monster Gate. But again, these are great cards. They again allow you to dig through your entire deck. Does this mean that you could possibly, if worst comes to worst, send all 3 of your imaginations to the graveyard before you even get to Decatron? Yes, that's exactly what it means. And at that point, terrible fucking luck, oh my god. But most of the time that isn't going to happen. Closing thoughts on this deck, it's pretty good. I wouldn't say that it's the best. This deck is not the best that it could be. I workshopped this deck from what someone called a pure deck, because that's what this is. This is a pure deck. This is 60 cards. This is the absolute maximum of what a deck can be. And I'd say that it works as well as it's supposed to. So, yeah. Pretty good deck. When you see this, and when you see this, and you get all the way to the end of this, hopefully you do, tell me if you're actually interested in this deck over the one that you are wanting to play right now, which is pretty sure is Aliens. And I won't do another one of these, but I will do another one of these when you say when you message me and say that you have seen this, you got all the way to the end, and you're indecisive. Because I've got others that I'm still making right now based on the entire idea of the Fiend type, which, if you didn't know, Fiend in the Japanese is just translated perfectly, it's demon. So I'm just going through all of the Fiend decks, making them as pure as possible, playtesting them so that they are working correctly, and then I'll make a video on each and every one of them. This one's close to an hour long. I didn't plan for it to be an hour long, but going through so many cards is going to do that. I'm not a professional at this. My mouth is kind of dry. So I will talk to you at that point. See ya.